Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for this episode entitled Those Darn White Blood Cell Counts. So we got through our gallbladder attack last week, decided not to have surgery, which meant that I could move forward with additional chemotherapy this week. And we made our best plans, but you need to adapt sometimes based on the most current information. So just like I talked about in my last video about adaptation, this week I'm going to share with you about a hiccup that we encountered and kind of what we did from a game plan going forward. So we arrived for my chemotherapy session bright and early at 7:30 this week. First thing they do every time is take your vitals. So from a weight perspective, I gained 2 pounds, so I was really excited that I was able to not only maintain but actually put a little bit of weight back on. My blood pressure was a little bit higher, but I think I might have just been a little stressed because it had been a while with the gallbladder and trying to get back into the swing of things. Or maybe I knew something was up or going to be different this round, so my blood pressure was a little bit high. And then what they do is they go ahead and they insert the needle into my port, and the first thing they do is draw blood. They draw blood so that they can run the battery, the CBCs, chems, all those things you hear about in the emergency room dramas that you see on TV. So they draw the blood and they want to make sure that you're in good shape before you take on the chemo, because obviously chemo is very intensive on your body, and so they want to make sure your body's in the best shape to handle the chemo. So I had my blood drawn, and unfortunately when it came back, what we learned was my white blood count cells were very low. The white blood count cells, as a reminder, are those cells that help to fight infection. So I'm very susceptible to infection now, and actually they advised me to start wearing a mask if I go out into public because my white blood cells are low. This is normal from chemotherapy treatment in that when you go through the chemotherapy, it doesn't discriminate for the cells. And so it kills off all the cells, including white blood cells. So we typically see that immediately after a chemotherapy treatment, your white blood cell counts are down. What might have happened with me is we had the treatment, and then I had the gallstone attack, which also was another infection that we treated with antibiotics. And so it just, my overall immunosuppressives were down. And so the impact is that I couldn't do chemotherapy. Without the white blood cells being up where they need to be or in a desirable range, they won't administer the chemotherapy. So Megan and I thought that we were actually going to have to leave with nothing. And just have spent a morning going in. But what we found out in talking with our physician, again, a great care team, came up. We talked about what was going on. He shared with him how well we did in round 2, then the gallbladder piece, and then this. And so we did agree that we can't do the chemotherapy because obviously the white blood counts are too low, and it would put me in a compromised position. But what we were able to do is continue on with the immunotherapy and with the clinical trial drug. So I wasn't in the infusion center quite as long today, but I did get the opportunity to be infused with the immunotherapy and the drug. And so we did that today, got out a little bit early, had some lunch with my wife, and I was able to hop back on and get back to work. I was able to do some work while I was in the infusion center, so it was great. Because of what happened with my gallstones, we actually switched weeks of when we had chemotherapy, and we realized we really liked the group of people that were in our last treatment week because they were quiet in the ward. And so in the infusion center, it's set up in these little pods, and each pod has 4 different little sections where you can sit that have walls, but then there's just a curtain. So it's not like having a private room in a hospital. You're in these pods, and the nurse handles all the patients that are in that given pod. They have a restroom there for patients so that as you're going through, you can kind of roll your IV pole over and use the restrooms as you need to. But our previous time was great because we don't watch the TV. We'd like to read, and I typically am working or taking a little bit of nap. And so we really enjoyed our last group. And this group, we got stuck next to a gentleman who, I kid you not, he turned his TV on very loud, and then he talked on his phone for like 2 or 3 hours, and the conversations were just meaningless or mind-numbing. But he was very loud, and so the nurse actually told us that he's one who he thinks he knows everything, and he tells the nurses what they need to do, and he's a little bit of a challenge, but she was just piling on the sweetness to him, and she handled him really well, and I complimented her about that as well. But this group was loud, so we're hoping that maybe next time when we go in 2 weeks and we get hopefully the full chemotherapy, immunotherapy, and the clinical drug, that maybe we'll get in a pod with someone who's not quite as noisy and more to our liking of kind of just keeping it quiet and soft conversations, but not disrupting all of those around you. So for my gratitude moment this week, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of the date October 20th, which happens this week. When I was going through trying to figure out what's wrong with me, the gastroenterologist wanted me to have the endoscopy. And I was fine with that endoscopy, but when I went to the scheduler back in August, the first available date for an endoscopy was October 20th. And had I had to wait till this week to get that endoscopy, to get the diagnosis of cancer, I would have missed out on the opportunity of 2 rounds of chemo, 3 rounds of immunotherapy, 3 rounds of the clinical trial drug, and starting to see shrinkage of the cancer. And so I am grateful that I was an advocate, and I talk about that in another video, right? I was an advocate for my health. And when we were with the scheduler, I said, how do I get in earlier? And she said, well, I can put you on the cancellation list. And God bless her for doing that, because she put me on the cancellation list on a Friday, and I had my endoscopy the next Wednesday and was diagnosed with cancer on Friday. From there, we went right to the oncologist and started the therapy. And again, 3 rounds of immunotherapy, 3 rounds of the clinical drug, and 2 rounds of chemotherapy before we even hit the date where I was supposed to have my original endoscopy. So God was certainly looking out for us and watching out for us and keeping us in his palms to know that we needed to get in earlier. So that's my moment of gratitude for today. Thank you again for watching. I'm Craig with One Man's Cancer Journey. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and like it. If you're haven't subscribed, I encourage you to subscribe and watch my other videos. This is just me going through cancer, and I want to share it with others so that they can understand and support themselves if they're going through cancer, or others if they're supporting others that are going through cancer. Thank you, and have a blessed week.